Hey folks, it's Lori Silverman here with the first episode of Level Up with Lori. I am so jazzed. There is only one person I wanted to do my first show with, and she has joined me today, and that's Karen Dietz. I have known Karen since, I think, 2003 when I met you as part of an event that the National Storytelling Network was holding in Chicago. But I want to tell you what Karen does today because that relates to what we're going to talk about in this show, and then the history between her and I, because that will also influence what we speak about today. So Karen has worked for over 20 years in the transformational communication and storytelling industry, and she's now applying that mastery to customer experiences so clients can more easily differentiate themselves from their competition. And welcome, Karen. I'm so happy to have you here with us.
Oh, great. Thanks, Lori. It's such a treat to be here.
Wonderful. I want to go back in time just a little bit to that 2003 point, because I don't think people realize that you were the impetus for my second book on business storytelling, which is Wake Me Up When the Data is Over. You and I had a lunch, if I remember, in Palm Desert, California, where you were in process of applying to be the executive director of the National Storytelling Network. And I was telling you that I had released, co-authored a book called Stories Trainers Tell, and had done some media work. And everybody kept saying to me, can stories be used in more than training? And I had pitched to you a book about going around the world and finding examples of different types of storytelling methodologies. I'm just going to hold for a second here. I'm trying to get back to the live show itself so I can see us and see all the different questions that people might be asking. And I don't know if anyone is with us today, but if you are, if you could make yourself known, that would be really helpful, so we can know if you're hearing us or have some questions you would like us to answer. But you were very supportive of that, and we ended up doing, I think, like 12 or 15 drafts of a proposal with an acquisitions editor from Josie Bass, and that book came to be in 2006.
That's right.
Yeah, lots of different examples. But we're not here today to talk about business storytelling. And by the way, Karen and I also wrote Business Storytelling for Dummies together in 2013.
Great.
She came to me and said, would you join me? Or actually, if I remember correctly, I think we have Ian is with us from the West Coast. So welcome, Ian. But I remember the date that I remembered, I think that influences this particular show, was like October or November of 2014. Actually, I don't know if you realize this, December of 2013 is when the book came out. So this is what, our 6th anniversary year of having the book. I'm so excited. But you and I talked about doing an article for the National Speakers Association on how to storify data.
Right.
And I said to you, why did we put chapter 8 in the book? Which I thought was kind of funny, but maybe you can tell our listeners what you shared with me, because that sparked a whole bunch of things that have happened.
It did. Well, I think for a little context, right? For many years, I curated content on business storytelling, transformational communication. And over the years, I kept seeing data storytelling being a trend that was emerging. So I kept watching that trend. And I realized that every time I curated something on data storytelling, my numbers shot way up, right, in terms of engagement. So I go, okay, so this is definitely something that has legs. Of course, I was a little perturbed at I guess, how people were talking about the data storytelling, because it was more from the visualization world and less from the story world, right? But at some point, you have to be able to stand up and communicate about the data. And that's what the real big missing piece was that I saw. And so when it came time for us to work on the book, I go, oh, we definitely need something on data storytelling, because that's a huge topic, a lot of interest. People are really struggling with it, right? And we have a unique perspective. And so why not include it? And we did. And I still continue to get comments, from readers about that chapter and how much they like it and how much it's helped them. So.
Well, and we are probably to like version 200,000 or something.
Yeah, something.
On what we put into that chapter. I think the research that we knew about at the time was limited, and so so what I'd like to share with all of you is that I've asked Karen to join me in another show that will come up hopefully in the next few weeks, where we talk specifically about brain research and the topic of business storytelling attached to data, because I think that deserves its own show. But I remember saying to you, after asking, why did we put this chapter in the book, and you had shared this curation piece with me. Donna reminded me of it like a year later, that when I sat down and kind of looked at the totality of the books and articles in the industry, I came back to you. And I remember us scheduling a call, and I said, I see 2 additional gaps. It's not, or maybe 3 for me. It's, like you said, people are defining story as data visualization, and that's still the case.
Yeah.
As Gabrielle Dolan said when I did a podcast with her, she said the word story has been hijacked, and not in a good way.
Right.
So we do need to talk about that in the future, our definition of story and why we feel that way so strongly, but it deserves its own hour. But the second piece that I saw was that people were claiming observations to be insights, and they didn't understand, right? They didn't understand the data that you and I know, because we're both academics. And by the way, Karen teaches it was a virtual reality course, right, on business storytelling.
Right.
And that is at what university?
University of California, San Diego.
Yeah, and you've taught it now a couple of times, so I would encourage anyone who's hi Larry, nice to see you. Anyone who's listening in to take advantage of that. I mean, I have never taught in a virtual reality classroom. I teach online, but I can imagine it's quite something. But anyways, I saw this difference between observation and insight, that no one knew what insight meant from a research perspective. And then the third piece that I came to you with, and I asked you to collaborate on, was I didn't see a process. Process outside of what the data science community calls OCM. And for those of you where that acronym is new, it's OSEMN, and starts with obtaining the data, and then scrubbing the data, and goes from there. But it ends at interpreting the data. Right. So it has nothing to do with action. And I said to you, I think we need to develop a methodology for moving from data to insight to action, and show where the role of story is.
Yeah, and there's things like business analytics and data science that works on coming up with insights. But I think our particular view and work on insights has all been designed with what we know about what works in the brain and storytelling. And so it's different. It's a different point of view, and some different results that we're going to get when we apply our methodology, which we've been able to articulate and put together and test out over the past few years. And so I don't want it to be an either or. It's another way to get at even more powerful insights than what you might be doing today, right?
Yeah, well, this distinction I make for people is that often from a data science perspective, although this is changing because they're now starting to talk about the power of business questions, we talk about the difference between interesting insights and meaningful insights. Yes. And you and I chose to focus on meaningful. So what kind of happened, and allow me just to briefly explain this and chime in, is I said to you, we need to use a framework that is known in the academic community, because you and I are both there, but also that's known in the practitioner community.
Mhm.
And I don't know what caused me to recall the data wisdom continuum.
Oh, but thank God you did.
Yeah, really, because it made our lives easier.
Right.
So what Karen and I did was we took the 5-step data wisdom continuum, because some of the visualizations are 4 steps, but those 5 steps are data, information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And we gave different definitions to them based upon our background in knowledge and data, because I tell people that, you know, it was more than 30 years ago that I would partner with teams of statisticians and organizations to embed data into decision making. You've been using data for years as well.
And we both have, as you said, we both have this background in knowledge management and how knowledge is formed, and then how it's transmitted, and then how it's interpreted, and how it's sort of handled well or not so well in an organization, right? And so that again is another, you know, twist of viewpoint, right? That I think we've been able to bring to the table, right? That's informed our thinking.
Absolutely. But when we started this, and Karen and I, one of the things that we did was we said, first of all, like, what's the key question that will get answered at each of these pieces? And I want to share those in just a minute. But when we did that, we saw a gap. So we said to ourselves, well, data, what data do you need, or do you have the right data? And I remember you saying to me, well, heck, Lori, stop right there.
Right.
Right. This framework is missing a piece, and you started to identify a whole piece. Maybe you can describe for us on what you called business value.
Right. So what I kept thinking was, well, all the questions about the data are definitely valid, right? You got to go through there and work with those questions. But you are conveying the data to some other person who may not be as data literate as you are, right? Who may not care about all of the things that you did with the data to scrub it, to clean it, to get it in a good place, right? What they want to know is, what is the business value of the data? How can I use this to, you know, advance the business? How can I use it to solve a business problem that I'm trying to solve? And so what we started to understand by, you know, our talking with a lot of people in the field, by going through it, the articles and the literature, is that there was a gap between both the you know, how do I want to say it? I think the majority of both executives and the data folks in an organization about how to really convey and articulate and work with the business value. So I don't know if that's quite a fair statement, but I hope you're trying to get where I'm going with this.
Yeah, and what I say to people is, you know, there's 3 or more questions that have to get answered, and then a slew more. You know, you can either ask yourself, you know, what's the problem the business is trying to solve? And I need to get really specific. And today I talk about it as that question has to be actionable question. It can't just be a question that gets at knowledge, because that's not enough. That's where data science has been stopping. So it has to be, you know, what problem are you trying to solve, or what decision are you trying to make, or what opportunity are you trying to capitalize on? And then I think when you and I started to flesh that out, we also said things like, well, what's the pain and urgency to learn this?
Yes.
Or, you know, from an intuition perspective, because we know that intuition is also data. From an intuition perspective, what happens if a leader comes to you and says, yeah, I'd like you to get this data for me because it's not coming up on my monthly report and I need to make a decision in 3 days about this, which would be an ad hoc inquiry. But, you know, if you say to the leader, well, what, you know, do you already think you know what the answer is going to be? And someone says, yeah, I'm 1,000% certain it's going to be X. I say to people, don't bother. Just don't bother to do it. I mean, another way to look at that is if a leader says, well, I think it could be 3 outcomes. And then I play with them and I say, well, if it was outcome number, you know, 1, what action would you take? and they say ABC, and I say, would you be willing to take that? And if they say, oh, heck no, it's also cause for concern before you ever get started.
Right.
But the other piece you and I figured out was that this also meant that existing dashboards and organizations have to change too.
Well, yeah, they're going to get modified. And I really want to say that you've really nailed this intuition piece, right? That's a huge piece that you've brought to the table. Yeah, absolutely. And something that is not that often talked about, right? So I like it.
Yeah. But we also, I think, realize that without a business value question being specific, and some people talk about it as what's your hypothesis, that's much more scientific, and it's not really the way the business talks. So we use more business speak.
Right.
But in any case, the challenge becomes if you don't have that question, there is no insight because there is no context, right, for the data.
Right. As you and I have always said, it always goes back to the art of the question and being able to ask really good questions to get where you want to go. And most people start with the data and we say, oh, no, start with the questions.
Right. Which brings us to why is it more, I always say data is meaningless without a decision. Yeah, it gets me a lot of friends.
Yeah, right. I get it.
Right. But then we also added some pieces from my background, which is the I. And the I was the whole issue around trustworthiness, right? The reliability and the validity of the data. Right. Can you trust it? Or do you? I think your question was like, do you have confidence in it?
Right.
And I think that what I've added to that today is another piece that I learned from conversations with a business leader in Eastern Europe is he said to me, you have to say, do you trust the person who's given it to you?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah, because, if you don't trust that person, it doesn't matter. You're not going to look at the data either. So then you have to strategically think about who's handling the data and how is that being shared with the stakeholder so that they'll still have confidence in the data itself.
Right.
And then the third piece, what we did with knowledge, understanding, and wisdom is we made those each different types of insights.
Yes.
Right? Do you want to describe like those three? Because I know that you've been playing with those as well.
Right. So, I think it goes back to basic communication, story principles, which is what kind of a reaction do your listeners have, right? Because imagine yourself, you have all the data, you're giving a presentation, you've got people in the meeting, right? And they're going to have one of three reactions if you do it well, right? And one is, okay, I get it. Just kind of validates what you already know, right?
Right.
Another reaction is, oh yeah, this makes sense. And this kind of reaction is, oh, right, it makes sense because you're telling me something that I can take action on today, right? About what we're already doing, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, I could see that, right? This is low-hanging fruit, right? And then you have another reaction, which is sort of like along the lines of, oh my God, that is revolutionary. That is a game changer for our business. And I don't know that we're willing to go there right yet, but yeah, I see it. Or sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, it's so revolutionary. We've got to do that to break the mold, right? So those are the three kind of reactions. And so what we did together was we articulated these three levels of insights. First, a knowledge insight, right? And that's like, okay, yeah, we know that. Good that we know that. We just validated it again. Okay?
So before you go on, couldn't you have a new knowledge insight?
Well, you can. And sometimes that shows up then more as the next level, which is, oh, this is something that we can do something about, right?
Okay.
So, and I think when you're thinking about action, right, you really need to think about, well, I don't need to take action on the knowledge insights because we're just validating what we already know, right? But where the business value is and where the heart of the matter is in being able to take action. And so the next level of insights, which is action insights, this is stuff we can, actions we can take today about what we're already doing, improve a process, fix a problem over here in the technology, whatever all that is, right? And so that's so valuable for an organization. The problem is if you're looking for an insight that is really, a game changer insight, and you're trying to do that by only finding those action insights about what you can do today, you can see that you're never going to get really where you want to go. So again, it goes back to the art of the question, because you're going to ask yourself different questions at that knowledge place, at that action place, and at that, well, we've called that wisdom place, but I actually have started to reference it more as a future state, right?
Yeah, so the words I've been using for the first action is more like familiar action, and people tend to go to like best practices, right? It's kind of like automatic in the brain because we don't want to work that hard.
Right.
You just say, oh, I've seen this problem before. I saw it 5 years ago, or we saw it in another part of our organization. This is what we did and it seemed to work. So let's try this, right? Mm-hmm. But it's that next level, like you said. So that familiar action piece that you're talking about, or today's action, was what we would be called understanding on the continuum. So that's kind of where we started, but this is where we are today, right? And then there's that wisdom piece that you've taken to renaming. And by the way, I just want to say hello to some folks from India, from Texas, from Melbourne, Australia.
Wow.
Yeah. And once you go through wisdom, I do have a question that someone has asked us. So we'll take a bit of a break after that.
Right. Okay. So that's basically the model, right?
Describe the wisdom one for me before we forget that.
Right. Okay. So I've been using the language future state right now, because it's wise and very easy to take the action steps that you need to do today, right? To improve a process or, go up the next level. But when you get to that place of game changer, right? Breaking the model, disrupting the marketplace, those kinds of scenarios, then what you're really talking about is moving to a future state.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm liking that language an awful lot. And you and I will both use the language that fits with our clients, right? So I'm not attached to the language. I'm more attached to, am I conveying the concept, well enough? Mm-hmm. And so that's how I think about it. And this often requires, if you're going there, I mean, just think about some of the groundbreaking products that have emerged over the past 10 years that are now, they're no longer future state, but they were, right, when they were first thought of, right?
Right.
And so there you go.
Well, I think that what we've come up with, and then I do want to get back to this question that I just saw here, is that it's possible within, let's say, even like a routine dashboard, let's say a scorecard on a monthly or quarterly or yearly basis. I mean, yearly to me, though, is too far out, to see all three different types of insights in the data. Mm-hmm. And that by teasing these three apart, that you actually get a richer understanding, right? And a richer place to say what actions do we need to take now versus in the future, or which ones might we need to fund,
right?
From in our next budget year,
right? Or is there a way that we can leapfrog into the future state, right?
Correct.
And then by doing that, it will require us to fix a lot of these, current how we work today, issues. So it's a strategic decision, right?
Yes.
These are strategies that you have to start considering, as opposed to what's the immediate problem I can solve. And so it's a different way to think about it.
Right. Well, what I say to people is think of an hourglass for our framework. As you move from business value to data to information, and then the three types of insights, that the knowledge, understanding, wisdom, just for sake of being concise at the moment. And the hourglass is you have to be very strategic up front. So strategic thinking enters this funnel.
Yeah.
The middle pieces, the data pieces where data science has been and data analytics is analytical. But what you're talking about when you're starting to get to insights, as we describe it, it's strategic thinking that's entering again. And
Yes.
I think that that's the other piece that we've missed, is that this is not a totally 100% analytical process. This starts with strategic thinking, it ends with strategic thinking, and then when you get to implementation, it might go back to action, But the question I have relates to what we've been talking about, and this is, and I'm sorry if I get your name incorrect, but Bella Murgarin asks, does a strategic dashboard good for taking decisions and actions?
Well, yes, it can. I mean, this is not an either or situation. They both inform each other. And I think the danger for me that I've seen with clients is, oh, let's just take the immediate action, right? Because these are easy things that we can solve. It's the low hanging fruit.
Right.
But without a consideration of so much maybe what are the market forces that are impacting us. This is a strategic decision, and how is my these action steps that I'm going to take on how we do business today, is that going to help us with these market pressures, right? These outside forces that are impacting us, or is it just going to make us be more efficient? Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but we also want to entertain both the questions at the same time.
Right. I think the problem I see is that today's dashboards, and what I learned about, and I mean, I was at the first Balanced Scorecard conference in 1995.
Yeah.
We never talked about setting up the initial KPIs or measures with any decisions in mind. So I think for me, the gap is that I have all this data, but I don't know why I'm looking at it. And a lot of it's not set up for actioning. It's just set up to tell us about status quo sorts of things or give us progress reports. And that is not going to be helpful long term if we desire to monetize the internal value of what you and I are talking about. And that's where I think the challenge is today. So, I tell people, if you're listening to this, you're probably realizing I'm really out there. Karen, she sees the totality of the reality of things. I mean, I'm really out there in a limb. And my limb comment is I'd be tossing out all existing scorecards and starting from scratch with, what are the questions we need to ask? And I just worked a few weeks ago with 17 CEOs on this. Mm-hmm. And that was their opening exercise with me. I had what are the strategic questions you need to answer in the next 90 days? What are the operational questions that are ongoing questions you always need to answer? And then what are those ad hoc tactical questions you need to answer just because a dashboard's not giving you what you want?
Right.
And what one CEO said to me, he had this huge aha, and he said, he said, if the question's not answered in 90 days, that's huge for my business because that's a delay.
Yeah.
He said, if nothing else, I realized that, wow, we have got to put down our questions in a much more specific way and then say, how long is it taking us to make these decisions?
Well, yes, absolutely. Of course, this also connects with leading and lagging indicators,
right?
And the importance of dashboards to being really on more of the leading indicators. And one of the clients that I worked with, I just loved this client, and they were so smart. And we were creating a dashboard, and it was all designed around actions that
Yes.
people in the organization could take, right, to meet certain objectives. And so it was more leading indicators and more designed around, oh, these are the actions you can take today. And here's a list of actions for you that you could take today to impact not only yourself, and your area of influence positively or higher, greater than before, but also than the organization as a whole. So it was both personally driven, organizationally driven. Tell you, it was a beautiful thing.
I'm curious, does that dashboard change regularly then, depending upon the actions that they need to take?
Well, I would think so, right? So it's been a few years since I've worked with them, but my understanding would be that, yeah, eventually those are going to shift depending on the new market realities that they are facing.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that if I can give my ideal world, and we got some really great feedback. We've been told by Larry, if that's the case, I'm out there with you ladies. This is a great validation that I have have my data, my organization looking at data the right way. So I appreciate that feedback. My observation is that, and I don't know if the applications are there yet, but the ideal world would be that the systems would be robust enough that your questions would routinely be changing for any sort of meeting that you were in. I mean, it might be if I take a middle management meeting and we're meeting once a month to look at certain sorts of indicators, in the operations of our business, that once a question is answered, we could say to ourselves, is that an ongoing question? And if it's an ongoing question, we'll continue to collect that data. If it's not an ongoing question, then, what are the new questions we need to be asking? And that the systems would be set up to be able to flex that easily. I think that's part of the gap today. And I'm actually in the process right now. I haven't shared this with you. I need to get this to you. A worksheet that I set up where I just said, down the side, what are all the decisions that need to be made? Across the top, what are all the data sources? And then you can make I don't know if we call it an X matrix because there's like 4 different ways to look at it. But then the data sources need to be linked back to the processes. Mm-hmm. And then by the decisions that you state with your questions, you're going to have the answers off to the side too. I had a student in a class last week add that piece. And so I think that we need to start getting more robust around what does this framework look like. Right.
In the customer journey mapping project that I just finished for our global company, it was really interesting because I was able to use this model and it was really illuminating. And so we collected insights from like a buku customers, and we ended up with 800 and plus, I forget the exact number, right, specific one-line insights. Right?
So before you go further, could you do something for us?
Yeah.
Because what was the business value question that drove this inquiry for the organization? Please.
Keeping and gaining market share.
Okay.
And so we know that when you become a customer-centric organization, you become much more profitable, and you're spending a lot less money on your reacquisition costs of clients. Right. And it's easier to get new clients. So there are all kinds of benefits to this. So, but bottom line, it was because even though this company is top in its field, right, gold standard, right, they got competitors nipping at their heels and eroding their marketplace. And so time to pay attention. And so they chose customer journey mapping as their first tool, which was great decision. So we gathered all these insights along, like 13 different life cycle phases that their customers go through. And then what I did is I used our model, and for each insight by customer segment. So we had 3 different customers. Right?
Okay.
So three different Excel spreadsheets. But what I did is I tagged each insight. Is this a knowledge insight? Okay, it validates what we already know. is this an action insight? Oh, this is something that we could take action on right away, right, to upgrade what we do. And then the last category was future state insights. These are things that your customers are saying they want you to move towards in the future and to be in the future. And so we ended up with like 500 plus action insights, stuff they could do today, right, about what they're already doing. And 50 to 60, I forget the exact number, future state insights.
Wow.
Now, that's rich, right? But that's where you also need to put your strategic hat on, right? And go, well, what do we really need to be doing? And if we choose a future state to move to, which one do we want to move to, and how's that going to impact all these others, right? These action steps. But one of the things that they wanted to have done, or I should say one of their objectives in general, was that they needed to be less of a siloed organization. Like, that's what every big company wants, right? So the next step that we took was to tag each insight and tag it in a way to think of, okay, well, now what this insight does is it points to a cross-functional process that needs to be handled. Or it points to a cross-functional tool that everybody needs to be able to work with. Or this points to a cross-functional KPI. And we don't have enough exact knowledge about the organization to be able to say this is a cross-functional process, but we say, okay, it points to it, right?
Right.
So get all your business units together, put them through some workshops so that you can articulate, well, yes, this is a cross-functional process we need to deal with. What is that, right? What do we need to do? And is this going to get us to the future state, right, that our executives have actually identified for us? So it's a great tool, right, for these insights, categorizing them in terms of knowledge, action, future state, and then having them point to these different areas of the organization that could help the executives shift their culture, right?
Well, and if from the little that you've shared with me in advance about this situation, if I remember correctly, you actually talked to customers. This was not an internally driven, like you just talked to people inside the organization, right?
No.
And that's a huge shift right there, right? I mean, because so many customer journey maps that I see is, oh, let's just get people inside the organization together and let's map what we believe is the customer journey. But you actually talk to lots of external.
Right. And what we did internally was through our conversations, we were asking questions so that we could come up with problem statements, right? Mm-hmm. That the organization saw it as immediate needs. And then we validated those with the customers to see if there was a gap between what the organization thought and what the customers really think. Right. And so it was all outside driven. By that, I mean, we were asking customers their opinion, right? Give us input and feedback as opposed to it being internally driven. But that's how we connected the two together, was through the problem statement.
So did you end up having a hierarchy then of questions by the end? Because I know you started with the global question, but there are other questions that seemed to come out of that were sparked as a result of the conversations, or were they internally sparked?
Well, they were originally internally sparked.
Okay.
But you have to understand that all of the questions eventually get handled through moving through each life cycle phase and asking customers for their input along each phase of their entire journey. And so I think that's why it was easy to get the massive amount of insights that we did in a short period of time.
Absolutely. For anyone who's listening, if you have questions, I know that we're on a bit of a delay between us talking and you hearing us on LinkedIn or YouTube. Feel free to ask us any questions you have about Karen's example that she's sharing of the work that she's currently in process of doing. So was this, how did the client, I'm curious just myself, how did the client receive you discussing these three types of insights, and how did that feel to them?
Well, what the feedback we got is that it gave them more of a roadmap for specific things to happen. And it allowed us, as the outside third-party consultants, to come up with better recommendations. And they have all this data, they can dig into it, right? They can take it, have those workshops. They have now a lot of concrete ways to move forward. And so I think they really appreciate that, because this is not part of typical journey mapping.
Right.
Right. This is what we did with the data. Right. It's typical journey mapping and getting the data, but it's atypical in bringing back the data to the client in a way that they can use it and take action on it in very specific ways. So I think that's what's different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're probably not to this point yet, but in the overall model that you and I created together, what we share with people is that the reason the back end of this framework is strategic and strategic thinking with the insights is because that's when story also enters. And you really have to start thinking. I mean, it becomes, which insights are the most valuable based on the original question, right? Who needs to hear those insights? What sorts of stories? We can brainstorm what sorts of stories we might use to bring those insights to the forefront, if we can, because sometimes the insights are very, very sensitive. And so it's like, ooh, time out. I ain't sharing this anywhere with anybody. I've just got to go find a confidant and kind of talk it through and figure out what do we do with this, because I could, somebody could have their head chopped off if this, came out. And I see that. I see that in data sets all the time, right? It's not unusual. And that's, I think, what we miss sometimes, and it gets buried, I think, in conversations. But for us, and like I said, I want to do another show with Karen where we talk about story, because and I know we have a little bit of a different perspective on this, but the brain doesn't really kind of like data, and so I'm a really
it
doesn't at all, and so a data visualization, I just tell people, is just another way of sharing data. It's not a story. It's not what you and I are talking about is a human narrative story. And so what you've given your client, especially on this transformative, innovative side, right, are the ability to create a future vision story, or multiple different scenarios of vision stories, and then to figure out which one of those they want to actually drive toward. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. There's another whole piece that I'm sure we'll be able to talk about next time we set up one of these around story, is that how most people organize the data and report on the data usually is all out of order. And doesn't follow narrative principles, which means that it's not going to be sticky.
Right.
And so we can talk more about that at another time. But what I also saw through this project, and some other recent projects that I've worked on with other clients, is that it's really critical to get the order of the data that you're presenting in good shape. Right? And it's typically not what you think, right? Because everybody's well trained, and here, let me just give you the data, blah, 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 right? And they don't know any different, right? And so that's why one reason why we're here is like, oh, no, wait, there's a better way to do it, right? That actually is sticky, helps people make better decisions, yada, yada. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that where you and I again are at a little bit different points is I'm like the data, the insights lead you to a story, and the data is a secondary. I think that's what we agree on. Is it's secondary, but I know that you work in some organizations where people say, I still want to share some of this. That becomes a bit of a challenge, and we need to figure this out, because in the ideal world, like like we said, the brain, it wants easy. It wants easy, and if you've landed upon the right insights, there's not. Let me go backwards. People say to me, "Well, story, you can't tell a story because it's so biased. You're biasing people." And I'm like, "Hello, let's go backwards in this process. You're biasing people with the business value question, first of all, in terms of how you frame it. It can be a biased question, especially if you're saying, should we do this or that? And it's a yes, no question, or you're trying to confirm something that you want to have happen. That's where bias first enters. But bias enters with the software you're buying, unfortunately, and the algorithms that massage your data. And there's some articles that are just starting to come out on this to talk about, your data is being manipulated by these systems. And what we're talking about, and I want you to hear with what Karen said with her project, they did not ignore a single comment.
Right.
In a software system, it might throw out those outliers. She didn't throw out the outliers. She coded them, and they became invaluable pieces to her client if they fit into one of those three categories, something we already know, something we need to action today, or something that has a more futuristic state. Am I hearing you correctly? Because I just want to bring that piece out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those knowledge, tagging those knowledge pieces, this is what we already know, as we validate, is so important, because not everybody across the organization has the same knowledge, right?
Correct.
And if we tag it in this way, okay, no, this is common knowledge, even though you might not know it, right? Now you can know it.
Right.
And so that serves, a critical piece.
Well, exactly, because we don't know what we don't know. And that's where my comment earlier came in about new knowledge. It might be old knowledge to me, but it's new knowledge, to someone in another part of the organization or in another country, nation, where we weren't thinking, oh yeah, we should probably relay that to them as well. I'm just wondering, as we're sitting here, so excuse me for a second, I haven't seen any new questions. So I'm wondering if people have questions along the way. As I said, I know that we're on a bit of a delay with them. I just don't know how long the delay is. I'm watching myself on the playback.
Right.
But if you do have a question for us, feel free to ask, and then we'll wrap this up in a few minutes. But please go on.
Yeah, no, I only wanted to say that the whole point behind shaping your data when you're communicating about it as a narrative is because you want the data to make an impact. You've spent all of this hard work gathering the data, analyzing the data, massaging the data, finding insights in your data, all of that stuff, right? Now it comes time to present that data to other people in the organization. And the biggest mistake people make is still getting lost in the data. Oh, it's all about the data, right?
Yeah.
And no, it's about how you communicate about the data, and are you doing it in a way where people can process it, where you can generate alignment around it, where they can remember it. And these are all things that story helps with, that straight data dumps do not.
Correct.
And even when you have data visualizations as a part of your data, if they're not coded in the larger deck, and if they're not in the right place in the larger deck, people won't remember. And so I just want to put that out on the table, because we have so many biases, and particularly in the data world, against narrative, when all narrative really is how do you order the data so that you can communicate it in a way that is effective for your audience.
Well, and for me, it's about how do you communicate the insight that comes from that?
Right.
Because in you've done all this work. I don't want to necessarily. I mean, one story way is to take them on the journey itself, which is a story.
Mhm.
But truth be told, time is of the essence, and everyone keeps saying to us, "I want to be more nimble." They keep saying the word agile, but it's really nimble inside of an organization. And if you want to be more nimble and you've got these insights, then why the heck are we going backwards?
Right.
To share the data when we've already got it. I mean, it's like, let's go forward.
Oh,
And I think that
Lori,
that's the other
I
piece of
can't
it.
tell you. I can't tell you how many clients I work with who have all this wonderful data to present, and not one insight has
Yeah,
been brought out and articulated and highlighted. And so part of the work that we do together is, okay, well, let's come up with the insight so that you can help your audience understand more better what's going on.
right.
So I just find that all the time.
Me too. I do have one question here from Ruth Ann. She said, it's been on my mind lately. What if your data scares the people whose decisions you are hoping to support? How to craft that narrative? And that's a great question, Ruth Ann. I think that's the topic of our next LinkedIn Live together that I'm kind of sensing we might need to do sooner.
I know. Yeah, and it's all about how do you position the data to create safety?
Right. And yes, and if you do have insights that are uncomfortable insights, it to me, it all goes back to, and this is going to sound really strange, what relationships have you built in the organization?
Oh, Lori, it's the whole thing that you've talked about before about persuasion and then persuasion.
Yes. Yep.
And so if people don't think about that, particularly when they're putting together a presentation about, okay, what are the persuasion meetings and check-ins that I need to have with people? What are the persuasion meetings and check-ins I need to have with people for my presentation to have legs, right? For my presentation to make a difference, for the data to actually mean something and move people forward. And so I really acknowledge you for bringing that into our discussions.
Thank you. Well, and just to let folks know, the word persuasion is not mine. That's Robert Cialdini's.
Yeah, I know.
He's got a whole book on it that you and I, as soon as we found it, we're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Fabulous stuff. And I love the word persuasion because I think that this is a process of communication, which is what makes it strategic. This is not a one and done meeting and I dump it all on you. So Ruth Ann, I really do appreciate your question. And I think it will be the spark for the next time that we engage together. Just wondering if there are, as we're going through here, if there are other questions that people might have as we're wrapping up our hour together. And Karen, the example, thank you, because, we have the application of this framework to the situation, the customer journey map is invaluable because, right now that's not a piece, the insight piece, as far as I know, hasn't been added in the work that I see being done in organizations. So I'm curious, as I'm waiting for questions, if you had to say, what did you gain from that process? Kind of like your own personal sort of learning, what would it be?
Oh, well, I think I just loved being able to use our model to show the client opportunities that they might not have been aware of or knew about, or that were buried, right, that needed to, be brought more into the light. And I also loved it being able to help the client by pointing to cross-functional KPI, right? Cross-functional process. And so all of this made me really, really happy. And I feel like, bottom line, we did like an amazing piece of work, far beyond what the scope of the project was. But when you know how to do something, like apply this model to a lot of data, are you going to say, no, I'm not going to do that because it wasn't in the SOW? No, you're just going to go ahead and do it, right? To provide greater value for the client.
Right. Well, I think that that's the, when I think about the name of the show, Level Up with Lori, that's the level up piece for today, is that, you know, even with qualitative data, like on a customer journey map project, that the insights are sitting there for the taking. And
Yes.
it's a matter of you stepping up and saying, can I label these? And I mean, for us, I'm a George Box fan. Most people, he's a professor who has since passed from UW Madison, but he has said no model is right. Some are just more useful than others. And if this is a useful framework for you, just the insight piece, let alone the business value question, because quite frankly, you have to have a business value question or you don't have any meaningful insights. You'll have interesting insights, but you'll have no meaningful insights. So these are bookends to this equation here. Right. But the level up piece for today is just use the insight piece, take it and apply it to work that you're doing now, right?
Yes.
And see what comes out of it. Because you might get a golden nugget that appears magically, in data that you're looking at anyways on a weekly or monthly or quarterly basis. And then say, how do I communicate that one golden nugget? Or two or three that I see going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Good summary. I love it, Lori.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful hour. Thank you so much for your time, Karen. I am so blessed to have known you for so many years and to continue to learn from you. And I am grateful that you've been able to share with all of my peeps on LinkedIn and hopefully others who choose to share this video on LinkedIn. And it's also been streamed onto YouTube, the sorts of things that you and I have been working on and the application of that to a recent project. And I look forward to having another show with Karen in the future on business storytelling and the research on the brain that goes behind that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. This has been just a pleasure, Lori. And thank you for asking me to join you. It's great.
You're welcome. Okay, see you all again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.